The fluorescent lights of the Baton Rouge Herald newsroom buzzed overhead as investigative journalist Sarah Chun stared at her computer screen, her coffee growing cold beside a stack of missing person reports. It was 2:30 a.m. on a Thursday in March 2024, and she'd been working on what should have been a routine story about rural Louisiana communities struggling with population decline. Another late night, Chun called out Marcus Williams, the night editor, as he made his rounds. "You know, normal people sleep at this hour." Sarah rubbed her tired eyes and gestured toward her monitor. "Marcus, come look at this. I think I've stumbled onto something." Marcus walked over, his curiosity piqued. Sarah had been with the Herald for 8 years, and her instincts were rarely wrong. "What you got?" "I was researching demographic changes in rural parishes for that piece on economic migration," Sarah explained, scrolling through spreadsheets. "But look at this pattern in Redemption Creek. It's a small Baptist community about 90 miles northwest of here." She pointed to a series of entries highlighted in yellow. "In the past 18 years, this town has reported 243 people as relocated or moved away. The thing is, Marcus, I can't find any trace of where they went." Marcus leaned closer, squinting at the data. "Maybe they just moved to bigger cities? That's pretty common in rural areas." "That's what I thought initially," Sarah said, opening another file. "But I cross-referenced with Social Security records, driver's license renewals, voter registrations, even social media. Nothing. It's like these people just vanished." The pattern was undeniable when laid out chronologically. Starting in 2006, families and individuals from Redemption Creek had been reporting relocations at a rate far exceeding normal migration patterns for similar communities. The reports came in clusters. Sometimes 5 or 6 families would leave within weeks of each other, only to be followed by months of stability. "What kind of numbers are we talking about percentage-wise?" Marcus asked, his journalistic instincts kicking in. Sarah pulled up her calculator. Redemption Creek had a population of about 1,200 in 2006. If you factor in normal births and deaths, losing 243 people over 18 years represents nearly a quarter of their community. "That's not normal migration, Marcus. That's systematic." Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. "Have you contacted local authorities?" "I called the Caldwell Parish Sheriff's Office yesterday," Sarah replied, frustration evident in her voice. Deputy Sheriff Tom Broussard told me that people move all the time and that I shouldn't read too much into it. But when I pressed him for details about any missing person investigations, he got defensive and said he couldn't discuss ongoing cases. "Ongoing cases? So there are active investigations." "That's what caught my attention too." He let that slip before catching himself. Sarah opened her notebook and showed Marcus her handwritten notes from the phone call. "I also spoke with the Redemption Creek Post Office. The postmaster, a woman named Agnes Thibodeau, mentioned something interesting. She said that when families move away, their mail forwarding requests are always handled by the church leadership rather than the families themselves." "Which church?" "The Redemption Creek Baptist Fellowship. According to my research, it's the dominant religious institution in the area. Nearly 90% of the town's residents are members." Marcus pulled up a chair. "Tell me more about this church." Sarah had been hoping he'd ask. "The church has been led by Pastor Isaiah Moreau for the past 20 years. Before him, it was run by his father, Pastor Ezekiel Moreau. The church owns significant property in the area, not just the sanctuary, but farmland, several residential buildings, and even the town's only grocery store. So they have economic control too?" "Exactly. And here's where it gets interesting." Sarah opened another document. "I found records showing that many of the disappeared families had donated substantial assets to the church before their relocations. We're talking about family farms, savings accounts, even children's college funds." Marcus whistled low. "That's a red flag if I ever saw one." "There's more," Sarah continued. "I managed to find 3 people who left Redemption Creek in the early 2000s, before this pattern really intensified. I tracked them down through old employment records. All 3 told me similar stories about increasing pressure from church leadership to surrender personal autonomy in exchange for spiritual guidance." "Did they mention anything about people disappearing?" "That's just it. They left before things got really bad. But one of them, a woman named Rebecca Landry, told me something chilling. She said that in her final weeks there, Pastor Moreau had started preaching about purification and the need to remove corrupt influences from their community. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and frowned. That's weird. What is it? I left a voicemail yesterday for Pastor Moreau, requesting an interview about the community's demographic changes. This text is from him, sent at 2:15 a.m. It just says, Miss Chin, some stones are better left unturned. Redemption Creek takes care of its own. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Sarah, I think you need to be very careful with this story. If there's something criminal happening, that's exactly why I have to pursue it, Sarah interrupted. Marcus, we could be looking at a cult situation where people are being systematically eliminated or hidden away. The fact that Pastor Moreau is texting me at 2 a.m. suggests he's watching communications closely. Have you considered contacting the FBI? Sarah nodded. That's my next step, but I need more evidence first. Federal authorities won't take action based on demographic patterns alone. I need to find concrete proof that crimes have been committed. Marcus stood up, his expression serious. What's your plan? I'm going to Redemption Creek tomorrow. I want to see this place firsthand, talk to current residents, and try to understand how a community can lose a quarter of its population without anyone asking questions. I don't like the idea of you going alone, especially after that text message. I'll be careful, Sarah assured him. I'm planning to go during daylight hours and stay in public spaces. I'll check in with you every few hours. As Marcus headed back to his desk, Sarah turned her attention back to the computer screen. The numbers didn't lie. 243 people had vanished from Redemption Creek over 18 years, and the local authorities seemed either unable or unwilling to investigate. She pulled up Google Earth and studied satellite images of Redemption Creek. The town was small and isolated, surrounded by dense Louisiana bayou on 3 sides and accessible by only one main road. The church sat prominently in the center of town, its white steeple visible from every angle. Sarah made notes about what she could observe from the aerial view. The church's extensive property, several large residential buildings that might be communal housing, and what appeared to be a cemetery with an unusually large number of fresh graves for such a small community. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from Pastor Moreau. The faithful find peace in surrender, Miss Chun. The curious find only sorrow. Sarah screenshot the message and forwarded it to Marcus with a note. Evidence that someone is definitely watching. This makes tomorrow's visit even more necessary. As she packed up her things for the night, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to uncover something far darker than simple population migration. The systematic nature of the disappearances, combined with the church's economic control and Pastor Moreau's ominous messages, painted a picture of a community where questioning authority could be dangerous. Tomorrow, she would drive to Redemption Creek and begin searching for answers about what had happened to 243 missing people. Sarah moved toward the door, but the 2 men didn't step aside. Excuse me, I need to leave. One of the men, a heavy-set individual with calloused hands, spoke for the first time. Pastor says you might want to stay for our evening service. Real inspiring. I appreciate the invitation, but I have commitments back in Baton Rouge. Pastor Moreau nodded to the men, and they reluctantly stepped aside. Of course, Miss Chun, but remember what I said about stones being better left unturned. Some truths are too dangerous for the unprepared. As Sarah walked quickly to her car, she could feel eyes watching her from windows and doorways throughout the town. The morning mist had lifted, but the oppressive atmosphere remained. She started her engine and pulled away from the store, fighting the urge to speed that in her rearview mirror. She saw Pastor Moreau standing in the doorway, his phone pressed to his ear. He was making a call, and Sarah had the sinking feeling it was about her. As she drove toward the town limits, she passed the cemetery she'd noticed in the satellite images. Even at a distance, she could see that many of the headstones looked recent. For a community of 1,200 people, there seemed to be an awful lot of fresh graves. Sarah reached for her phone to call Marcus, but found she had no signal. The isolation of Redemption Creek was more complete than she'd realized. She pressed harder on the accelerator, eager to reach the main highway where she could contact the outside world and report what she'd discovered. Behind her, in Redemption Creek, Pastor Moreau was organizing a response to the threats Sarah represented. The community had worked too hard to maintain their secrets to let one curious journalist destroy everything they'd built. The morning mist hung heavy over the Louisiana bayou as Sarah's rental car wound along the narrow two-lane road leading to Redemption Creek. Spanish moss draped the ancient cypress trees like funeral shrouds, and the only sounds were the distant calls of herons and the gentle splash of water against the muddy banks. She'd left Baton Rouge at sunrise, wanting to arrive in the community during the busiest part of the day when people would be most likely to talk. According to her GPS, she was still 5 miles from town when she noticed the first sign, a weathered wooden board reading, "Redemption Creek Baptist Fellowship welcomes faithful visitors." Below it, in smaller text, was a Bible verse, "And ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." John 8, verse 32. Sarah found the choice of verse ironic. Given her mission.as, she crested a small hill. Redemption Creek spread out before her. It was smaller than she'd expected, maybe 30 buildings total, clustered around a central area dominated by the white church steeple she'd seen in satellite images. The architecture was typical of rural Louisiana, raised houses with wraparound porches designed to handle flooding, mixed with a few more modern structures. What struck her immediately was how quiet everything seemed. Despite it being 10:30 a.m. on a Friday, she saw very few people moving around the town. A few elderly men sat on the porch of what appeared to be the general store, and a woman was hanging laundry behind one of the houses, but the overall impression was of a place holding its breath. Sarah parked in front of the store and took a moment to compose herself. She dressed conservatively, dark slacks, a modest blouse, and a lightweight jacket to conceal the small recording device she carried. Her press credentials were in her purse, but she planned to introduce herself simply as a researcher studying rural Louisiana communities. The bell above the door chimed as she entered the store. The interior was cramped but well organized, with shelves of canned goods, basic household supplies, and a small section of fresh produce. Behind the counter stood a middle-aged woman with graying hair pulled back in a simple bun. "Good morning," Sarah said with a friendly smile. "I'm Sarah Chun. I'm doing research on rural Louisiana communities for a demographic study." The woman's expression remained neutral, but Sarah noticed her eyes quickly scanning Sarah's appearance, taking in everything from her shoes to her handbag. "I'm Martha Boudreau. Can I help you find something?" "Actually, I was hoping to talk with some longtime residents about how the community has changed over the years. I understand Redemption Creek has seen some population shifts lately." Martha's demeanor shifted almost imperceptibly, becoming more guarded. "People come and go. That's the way of things." "Of course," Sarah agreed. "But I noticed from census data that quite a few families have relocated from here recently. I was wondering if there were specific economic factors, or Miss Chun." The voice came from behind her, deep and authoritative. Sarah turned to see a tall man in his 50s approaching from the back of the store. He had salt and pepper hair, piercing blue eyes, and wore a simple black suit despite the warm weather. "I'm Pastor Isaiah Moreau. I believe you left me a message yesterday." Sarah's pulse quickened, but she maintained her composure. "Pastor Moreau, yes. Thank you for responding. I was hoping we could discuss the demographic changes in your community." "Of course. Why don't we talk in my office? It's more private there." His tone was pleasant, but there was something in his eyes that made Sarah's instincts scream caution. "Actually, I'd prefer to conduct interviews in public spaces," Sarah replied. "It's standard practice for my research methodology." Pastor Moreau smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I insist. There are sensitive matters that require discretion." Sarah felt the weight of the recording device against her ribs. "I understand your concern for privacy, Pastor, but I'm more comfortable here in the store." "Mrs. Boudreau, would you mind if we used a corner of your establishment for a brief interview?" Martha looked nervously between Sarah and Pastor Moreau. Well, I suppose, Martha." Pastor Moreau's voice carried a subtle warning. "Perhaps you could check on the inventory in the stockroom?" Martha immediately began moving toward the back of the store. "Of course, Pastor. I'll leave you to your conversation." Sarah realized she was now alone with Pastor Moreau in the store. The elderly men who had been on the porch were nowhere to be seen, and the woman hanging laundry had disappeared as well. The town's quietness suddenly felt more ominous than peaceful. "Miss Chun," Pastor Moreau said, stepping closer, "I want to be very clear about something. Redemption Creek is a community built on faith, trust, and mutual support. We don't appreciate outsiders coming here with accusations or wild theories. I haven't made any accusations, Sarah replied, keeping her voice steady. I'm simply researching demographic patterns. Are you? Pastor Moreau pulled out his phone and showed her the screen. It displayed a detailed profile, Sarah's employment history, her previous investigative pieces, even her home address. According to my research, you're an investigative journalist with a particular interest in exposing religious communities. Your last major story was about financial fraud in a megachurch in Texas. Sarah's blood ran cold. The level of detail in the profile suggested resources far beyond what a small-town pastor should have access to. How did you? Miss Chun, the digital age makes privacy an illusion. When someone starts asking questions about our community, we naturally want to know who's asking and why. The door chimed again, and two large men entered the store. They positioned themselves near the entrance, not threatening, but clearly blocking the exit. Sarah recognized the tactic, creating psychological pressure without overt intimidation. Pastor Moreau, I think there's been a misunderstanding, Sarah said, trying to project confidence. I'm simply a journalist doing research. If you're not comfortable with an interview, I'll respect that and be on my way. But that's just it, Pastor Moreau replied. I am comfortable with an interview. In fact, I insist on it. You see, when people leave our community, it's because they've found peace and purpose elsewhere. We help them transition to new lives, where they can serve God more fully. And where exactly do they go? That depends on their calling. Some go to missionary work overseas. Others join religious communities in different states. The important thing is that they're following God's plan for their lives. Sarah activated the recording function on her hidden device. Can you provide specific examples? Names of people who've left and where they went. Pastor Moreau's smile became predatory. Miss Chun, surely you understand that we respect people's privacy. When someone chooses to leave their old life behind, we don't betray their trust by sharing their new locations with strangers, even with their families. Their spiritual family is here, Miss Chun. Blood relations are temporary. Spiritual bonds are eternal. The way he said it sent chills down Sarah's spine. She was beginning to understand that the relocations might not be voluntary departures at all. I'd like to speak with some of the families who are considering leaving, Sarah said. Perhaps they could share their experiences. I'm afraid that won't be possible. Those families are in a period of spiritual preparation. They've taken vows of silence and seclusion until their transition is complete. How long does this preparation typically take? As long as necessary for them to achieve the proper state of surrender. Sarah noticed that Martha had not returned from the stockroom, and the two men by the door remained motionless. The situation was escalating beyond her comfort level. Pastor Moreau, I appreciate your time, but I should be getting back to Baton Rouge. I have other communities to visit as part of my research. Oh, but you've come such a long way, Pastor Moreau said. Surely you'd like to see our church, meet more of our congregation? I think you'd find our community quite transformative. The word choice was deliberate. Sarah was certain. Thank you for the offer, but I really do need to leave. Miss Chun, I'm going to give you some advice. Pastor Moreau stepped closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. There are forces in this world that are beyond the understanding of secular journalists. When you probe into sacred mysteries, you risk awakening things that are better left undisturbed. Sarah didn't feel safe until she was 30 miles from Redemption Creek and had full cell service restored. She pulled into a truck stop parking lot and immediately called Marcus, her hand still trembling slightly from the encounter with Pastor Moreau. Marcus, thank God you answered, she said as soon as he picked up. Sarah, you sound shaken. What happened? She quickly recounted her morning in Redemption Creek. Pastor Moreau's detailed background check on her, the intimidation tactics, and the disturbing way the entire town seemed to operate under the pastor's control. Jesus, Sarah, that's not normal small-town behavior. That's cult-level manipulation. It gets worse, Sarah said, watching the traffic on Interstate 165. The way he talked about people transitioning and finding peace through surrender. Marcus, I don't think these people are relocating voluntarily. I think they're being held against their will, or worse. Did you get any of this recorded? Some of it, yes. But Marcus, I need to find someone who escaped from that place. Someone who can tell us what really happens to people who leave Redemption Creek. Where do you even start looking for someone like that? Sarah had been thinking about this during her drive. Remember those 3 people I mentioned who left in the early 2000s? One of them, Rebecca Landry, lives in Lafayette now. I'm going to drive there and see if she'll talk to me. Be careful, Sarah. If Pastor Moreau has the resources to compile detailed background checks, he might be monitoring your communications too. I thought about that. I'm going to approach this differently. I'll use my personal contacts rather than official channels. Sarah ended the call and drove the remaining hour to Lafayette in thoughtful silence. Rebecca Landry had been 24 when she left Redemption Creek in 2004, according to the employment records Sarah had found. Now 44, she worked as a nurse at Lafayette General Medical Center and lived in a modest subdivision on the south side of town. Sarah found the address as Rebecca was arriving home from her shift, still wearing scrubs and looking exhausted. She was a small woman with auburn hair and tired eyes that seemed much older than her age suggested. Rebecca Landry. Sarah approached carefully, not wanting to startle her. Yes. Rebecca's voice was cautious. My name is Sarah Chun. I'm a journalist with the Baton Rouge Herald. I'm investigating some unusual demographic patterns in Redemption Creek, and I was hoping you might be willing to share your experiences living there. Rebecca's face went pale, and she looked around nervously as if expecting to see someone watching. I can't talk about that. I'm sorry. Rebecca, I understand this might be difficult, but I have reason to believe that people in Redemption Creek might be in danger. Your information could help. You don't understand, Rebecca interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. They don't let people just leave. They don't forget about you either. Sarah's investigative instincts kicked into high gear. What do you mean they don't let people leave? Rebecca glanced at her house, then back at Sarah. Not here. If you really need to know, meet me at the Café du Monde on Jefferson Street in 30 minutes. Come alone. 30 minutes later, Sarah sat in a corner booth of the small cafe, watching Rebecca approach with obvious reluctance. The place was nearly empty, just a few teenagers at the counter and an elderly man reading a newspaper by the window. Rebecca sat down across from Sarah, but kept her jacket on, as if ready to flee at any moment. Before I say anything, I need to know, how did you find me? Employment records and tax filings. You worked at Redemption Creek General Store before leaving in 2004. Those records should have been sealed, Rebecca said, frowning. I specifically requested that when I left. I'm sorry, but I don't understand. Why would employment records need to be sealed? Rebecca studied Sarah's face for a long moment, as if trying to determine whether she could be trusted. Finally, she spoke. Miss Chun, what I'm about to tell you will sound insane, but I need you to understand that what's happening in Redemption Creek is not just unusual demographic shifts. It's systematic control and elimination of anyone who questions Pastor Moreau's authority. Sarah pulled out her notebook. Can I record this conversation? Absolutely not. No recordings, no photographs, no real names except mine. If this information gets traced back to me. Rebecca shuddered. Let me tell you about my last year in Redemption Creek. Rebecca's story unfolded like a nightmare. She described a community where Pastor Moreau exercised total control over every aspect of residents' lives, from who they married to what jobs they held to how they spent their money. In 2003, things started getting worse, Rebecca explained. Pastor Moreau began preaching about purification and the need to remove corrupting influences from the community. Anyone who questioned his authority or who had too much contact with the outside world was labeled as spiritually dangerous. What happened to those people? At first, they just disappeared. Pastor Moreau would announce that they had answered a higher calling and left to serve God elsewhere. Their belongings would be distributed among the remaining congregation, and their names would never be mentioned again. Sarah took careful notes. But you suspected something else was happening. I knew something else was happening. My neighbor, a woman named Claire Thibodeau, started asking questions about where these people were really going. She had a brother who supposedly left for missionary work in Honduras, but when she tried to contact him through the church where he was supposedly serving, they'd never heard of him. What happened to Claire? Rebecca's hands started shaking. She disappeared too, but not before she told me what she'd discovered. Rebecca leaned forward, lowering her voice even further. Claire had been sneaking around the church property at night, trying to figure out what was really happening. She found a series of underground rooms beneath the main sanctuary. She described them as holding cells. Holding cells, small rooms, with locked doors, no windows, just basic furnishings. She said she could hear people inside, people who were supposed to have left town weeks earlier. Sarah felt her stomach drop. Did she confront Pastor Moreau about this? She tried to. She went to him with her evidence, demanding to know where her brother really was. That was on a Tuesday night. By Friday morning, Pastor Moreau announced that Claire had received a calling to join a contemplative order in Oregon and had left immediately. But you don't believe that's what happened. Miss Chun, I saw Claire the night before she supposedly left. She was terrified. She begged me to leave Redemption Creek with her, said we needed to get out before we ended up like the others. I was scared, but I thought she was being paranoid. How did you finally escape? Rebecca's laugh was bitter. I didn't escape. I was allowed to leave. And that's what makes this so terrifying. Sarah looked up from her notes, confused. I don't understand. Pastor Moreau called me into his office 3 days after Claire disappeared. He told me that I had potential for service in the outside world, and that God wanted me to leave Redemption Creek and establish a new life elsewhere. He gave me money, helped me find a job in Lafayette, even assisted with my housing arrangements. That sounds almost helpful. It was terrifying, Miss Chun, because I realized that Pastor Moreau only let certain people leave, people who would be too frightened to ever talk about what they'd seen. He let me go because he knew I'd spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, too scared to report what I suspected. But you're talking to me now, because 20 years have passed, and I can't live with the guilt anymore. Miss Chun, if you're right about 243 people disappearing from Redemption Creek, then Claire's underground prison has been operating for 2 decades. Those people, they're not being relocated. They're being held captive, or worse. Sarah's mind was racing. Rebecca, would you be willing to speak with federal authorities about this? No, absolutely not. Do you understand what kind of resources Pastor Moreau has access to? He knew details about your background that he shouldn't have been able to obtain. He has contacts inside law enforcement, maybe even federal agencies. How do you know that? Because for the first 5 years after I left, I was contacted regularly by people claiming to be from various government agencies, asking about my time in Redemption Creek. They always knew too much about my current life, my job, my relationships. It was psychological warfare, reminding me that I was being watched. Sarah felt a chill of recognition. Rebecca, have you been contacted recently? Since I started this investigation. Rebecca's face went white. How did you know? Yesterday, someone called my supervisor at the hospital, asking about my work schedule and whether I'd seemed agitated lately. They claimed to be from the state nursing board, conducting a routine check. Jesus, they're already monitoring you because I found your name. Miss Chun, you need to understand something. Pastor Moreau doesn't just control Redemption Creek. He has a network of supporters and resources that extends throughout Louisiana and beyond. If you continue this investigation, you're not just threatening one corrupt pastor. You're threatening an entire system. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and felt her blood run cold. It was from Pastor Moreau. Miss Chun, I hope you're enjoying your visit to Lafayette. Rebecca is looking well, don't you think? Sarah showed the message to Rebecca, who immediately stood up. I have to go. I can't be seen talking to you anymore. Rebecca, wait. Is there any evidence? Anything that could prove what you've told me? Rebecca paused at the edge of the table. Before Claire disappeared, she gave me something. She made me promise to keep it safe, said it might be the only proof of what was really happening in Redemption Creek. What was it? A list. Names, dates, and locations. People who had supposedly left town, along with notes about where they were really being held. She'd been documenting everything she discovered. Sarah's heart raced. Do you still have it? I buried it 20 years ago, and I've never told anyone where. Miss Chun, if you're serious about exposing this, if you really think you can bring these people justice, then maybe it's time to dig it up. Where? Rebecca looked around the cafe once more, then leaned close to Sarah's ear. There's an old cemetery on Highway 190, about 15 miles east of Lafayette. Look for the grave of Marie Boudreau, died 1923. The list is buried 3 feet north of her headstone, wrapped in plastic and sealed in a metal box. Rebecca, this could be the evidence we need to. Miss Chun, Rebecca interrupted. If you're going to do this, do it fast. Because now that Pastor Moreau knows we've talked, neither of us is safe. Rebecca walked quickly toward the exit, leaving Sarah alone with the terrifying realization that she had stumbled into something far more dangerous than she'd imagined. As she watched Rebecca disappear into the parking lot, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She was going to find Claire's list, and she was going to expose the truth about Redemption Creek, no matter what the cost. Sarah waited until 3 a.m. before driving to the cemetery on Highway 190. She'd spent the evening at her hotel researching everything she could find about underground detention facilities and religious cult tactics, building a framework for understanding what Rebecca had described. The more she learned, the more convinced she became that Redemption Creek was operating something far worse than a controlling religious community. The cemetery was old and neglected, with weathered headstones dating back to the 1800s. Sarah parked on the shoulder of the highway and used her phone's flashlight to navigate between the graves. The night was humid and still, with only the distant sound of traffic to break the silence. Finding Marie Boudreau's grave took nearly an hour. The headstone was simple granite, worn smooth by decades of Louisiana weather. Sarah counted 3 feet north and began digging with the small shovel she'd purchased at a 24-hour hardware store. 2 feet down, her shovel struck metal. The box was exactly where Rebecca had said it would be, a small waterproof container, wrapped in multiple layers of plastic. Sarah's hands trembled as she opened it, revealing a notebook and several loose papers covered in Claire Thibodeau's careful handwriting. Using her phone's light, Sarah began reading. What she found made her stomach turn. The list contained 47 names with dates spanning from 1998 to 2004. Next to each name, Claire had written detailed notes about when the person had supposedly left Redemption Creek and what she discovered about their actual fate. James Malankin, March 1999, supposedly moved to Texas for work. Actually held in Underground Room 3 for questioning about financial records. Last seen alive, April 1999. The Broussard family, Paul, Marie, children ages 6 and 9, July 2000. Supposedly relocated to Arkansas for farming opportunities. Children separated from parents. Paul held in room 7, Marie in room 2. Children's location unknown. Thomas Guidry, October 2002, supposedly called to missionary work in Guatemala. Discovered stealing food to support elderly mother. Held in room 5. Status unknown. Page after page detailed the systematic imprisonment and likely murder of people whose only crime had been questioning Pastor Moreau's authority or possessing resources he wanted to control. The most chilling entry was dated just 3 days before Claire's own disappearance. I've discovered the truth about the purification process. Pastor Moreau isn't just holding these people. He's eliminating them systematically once he's extracted whatever value they have: money, property, information. The underground facility has a crematorium. I've seen the smoke at night. God, help us all. Sarah photographed every page of the notebook before carefully resealing it and returning the box to its hiding place. As she drove back toward Lafayette, her mind raced with the implications of what she'd found. Claire's list provided concrete evidence of multiple kidnappings and probable murders spanning at least 6 years. If the pattern had continued for the 18 years since Claire's disappearance, the true scope of Pastor Moreau's crimes was almost incomprehensible. She called Marcus from her hotel room at 5 a.m. Sarah, thank God. I've been worried sick. Did you find the witness? Marcus, it's worse than we imagined. I have evidence of a systematic murder operation spanning decades. She quickly summarized Rebecca's testimony and Claire's documentation. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Sarah, this is beyond our scope. You need to contact federal authorities immediately. I can't trust local or state law enforcement. Rebecca said Pastor Moreau has contacts throughout the system. This needs to go directly to the FBI, but I need more than one witness and a 20-year-old list. What are you thinking? I need to find someone currently missing from Redemption Creek. Someone whose disappearance is recent enough that they might still be alive in those underground cells. Sarah had been thinking about this during her drive. Marcus, I need you to help me cross-reference the demographic data with more recent records. Look for families that have relocated from Redemption Creek in the past 6 months. I want to find their former addresses, employment records, Anything that might help me track down friends or relatives who could verify they never actually left Louisiana. Sarah, you're talking about investigating active kidnappings. If these people are still alive and being held captive, every day we delay could mean more deaths. Exactly why I can't wait for bureaucratic processes. Marcus, I need you to also research Pastor Moreau's background more thoroughly. His father ran the church before him. I want to know if this pattern of control goes back even further. I'll start on it immediately. But Sarah, promise me you won't go back to Redemption Creek alone. I won't go back at all until I have enough evidence to involve federal authorities. But Marcus, there's something else. Pastor Moreau somehow knew. I was meeting with Rebecca in Lafayette. His surveillance capabilities are more sophisticated than a small-town pastor should possess. What are you suggesting? I think we're dealing with something bigger than one corrupt religious leader. This might be part of a larger network. After ending the call, Sarah spent the morning researching missing persons databases and social media profiles for recent Redemption Creek relocations. She found 3 families that had supposedly moved away in the past 8 months. The Tran family, parents and 2 teenage children, elderly widow Martha Camo and young couple David and Ashley A. Bear. The Tran family's case particularly caught her attention. According to Pastor Moreau's announcements in the church bulletin, they had received a calling to serve in a Vietnamese Baptist mission in California. But Sarah's research revealed several troubling inconsistencies. First, the Tran family had owned a successful restaurant in nearby Monroe, which they had signed over to the church just 1 week before their supposed departure. Second, their daughter Jenny had been a senior at Redemption Creek High School with plans to attend LSU in the fall, plans that had been abruptly canceled without explanation. Most importantly, Sarah found Jenny Tran's Instagram account, which had been active until exactly the day her family supposedly left for California. The last post was a photo of Jenny with friends at a school basketball game, captioned, "Can't wait for graduation." Nothing in her social media history suggested any interest in missionary work or leaving Louisiana. Sarah called the Vietnamese Baptist Church in Fresno, California, where the Tran family was supposedly serving. The receptionist had never heard of them. "I'm sorry, but we haven't had any new missionary families join us this year," the woman said. "Are you sure you have the right church?" Sarah tried 3 other Vietnamese Baptist churches in California with the same result. The Tran family had never arrived at their supposed destination. Her phone rang just as she was preparing to expand her search. The caller ID showed Marcus's number. "Sarah, I've been digging into Pastor Moreau's background, and what I found is disturbing on multiple levels. Tell me, Isaiah Moreau didn't just inherit the church from his father. He inherited a system. I found records going back to the 1980s showing similar patterns of community members relocating under Ezekiel Moreau's leadership. The demographic shifts in Redemption Creek have been consistent for over 40 years. Sarah felt a chill. So, this has been going on for decades longer than we thought. It gets worse. I also found financial records showing that both Ezekiel and Isaiah Moreau have received substantial donations from something it called the Spiritual Renewal Foundation, a shell organization that I can't trace back to any legitimate source. How substantial are we talking? Millions of dollars over the years, Sarah. This isn't just a local cult operation. Someone with serious resources has been funding whatever's happening in Redemption Creek. Sarah's mind raced with the implications. Marcus, have you found any connections between the Spiritual Renewal Foundation and other religious communities? That's what's really scary. I found similar funding patterns for at least 6 other isolated religious communities across the South. All of them have reported unusual demographic shifts, and all of them are led by pastors who have family connections to the original leaders. You're talking about a network of communities operating the same system. It looks that way. Sarah, I think Redemption Creek might just be one node in a much larger operation. Before Sarah could respond, her hotel room phone rang. She looked at Marcus's name still showing on her cell phone screen. He was still on the line. "Marcus, someone's calling the hotel room. How would anyone know I'm here? Don't answer it." But Sarah's investigative instincts overrode her caution. She picked up the hotel phone while keeping Marcus on her cell. "Miss Chun." The voice was calm, cultured, and completely unfamiliar. "My name is Dr. Vincent Russo. I believe you've been investigating our community in Redemption Creek." Who is this? I'm someone who has been watching your investigation with great interest. Miss Chin, you've stumbled onto something that is far more complex than you realize. I'd like to offer you an opportunity to understand the full scope of what we're trying to accomplish. Sarah's blood ran cold. What are you talking about? The Spiritual Renewal Foundation, Miss Chun. The organization that has been supporting communities like Redemption Creek for over 40 years. We're not criminals, Miss Chun. We're social scientists. Social scientists who kidnap and murder people. Dr. Russo's laugh was soft and unsettling. Miss Chun, every significant advance in human understanding has required sacrifice. What Pastor Moreau and others like him have been conducting are longitudinal studies in social control and community management. The subjects who have been transitioned have contributed to research that will ultimately benefit all of humanity. Sarah motioned frantically for Marcus to stay on the line while she continued the conversation. You're describing human experimentation. I'm describing the future of social organization, Miss Chun. Traditional democratic societies are chaotic, inefficient, and ultimately unsustainable. What we've been developing in communities like Redemption Creek are models for optimal human social structures, by imprisoning and killing people, by eliminating variables that disrupt social harmony. Miss Chun, the subjects in our studies live longer, healthier lives than they would in chaotic urban environments. Those who adapt to our community structures find genuine peace and purpose, and those who don't adapt are humanely transitioned to contribute to our research in other ways. Sarah felt sick. You're talking about murder. I'm talking about the greater good, Miss Chun. But I'm calling because I'd like to offer you an alternative to continuing this investigation. What kind of alternative? Join us, Miss Chun. Your investigative skills and media connections could be invaluable to our work. We need people who can help identify other communities suitable for our research programs. You want me to help you find more victims? I want you to help us build a better world. Miss Chun, traditional journalism is a dying profession. What I'm offering you is the opportunity to be part of the most significant social research project in human history. Sarah looked at her cell phone, confirming that Marcus was still recording the conversation. Dr. Russo, I need time to consider your offer. Of course. But Miss Chun, I should mention that your investigation has already had unintended consequences. The Tran family, whose case you've been researching, they were scheduled for gradual integration into our program, but your inquiries have accelerated their timeline. What does that mean? It means, Miss Chun, that if you continue your investigation without joining our organization, the Tran family will be transitioned to the research phase much sooner than planned. Their survival now depends entirely on your cooperation. The line went dead. Sarah immediately turned her attention back to Marcus. Did you get all of that? Every word. Sarah, this is insane. They're not just running one cult. They're running a network of experimental communities and using murder as a research tool. Marcus, they have the Tran family. They're threatening to kill them if I don't stop the investigation. Sarah, you have to contact the FBI immediately. This is federal kidnapping, murder, and conspiracy on a massive scale. But if I do, they'll kill the Tran family and destroy all the evidence. I need to find a way to locate those underground cells and document what's happening before they can cover their tracks. Sarah's hotel room phone rang again. This time she answered immediately. Miss Chun, this is Agent Lisa Morrison with the FBI's New Orleans field office. We need to meet immediately. Your investigation has intersected with an ongoing federal operation, and both your safety and the safety of potential victims depend on your cooperation. Sarah looked at her cell phone. Marcus was still on the line, and she could hear him breathing heavily. Agent Morrison, how did you know to contact me? Miss Chun, we've been monitoring communications related to the Spiritual Renewal Foundation for over 2 years. Your investigation has provided us with evidence we've been seeking, but it's also put you in immediate danger. What kind of danger? The kind that requires federal protection. Miss Chun, can you be at the FBI field office in New Orleans in 2 hours? Sarah looked around her hotel room, suddenly aware of how exposed she was. Dr. Rousseau had found her easily, and if the Spiritual Renewal Foundation had the resources he'd implied, staying in Lafayette was no longer safe. Agent Morrison, I'll be there, but I have evidence that needs to be secured immediately, and I have information about people who may still be alive and held captive. Bring everything you have, Miss Chun. It's time to end this. As Sarah packed her belongings, she realized that her investigation had evolved from a story about demographic patterns into a federal case involving multiple murders and an ongoing threat to innocent lives. The next few hours would determine whether the Tran family and potentially dozens of other victims could be saved, or whether the Spiritual Renewal Foundation would succeed in covering up decades of crimes. I'll do it, Sarah said, but I want to call my editor first. If something happens to me, I want him to know the whole story. Of course, Agent Morrison said. But Miss Chun, once you make that call, there's no going back. This operation will proceed whether you participate or not, but your involvement could mean the difference between saving lives and losing them. As Sarah prepared to call Marcus, she realized that her investigation had led her to the most important moment of her career. In less than 8 hours, she would help federal agents raid a facility where dozens of innocent people might be held captive and where the evidence of decades of murder and human experimentation would finally be exposed. The story that had started with simple demographic patterns was about to become the most significant criminal case in Louisiana's history. The FBI field office in New Orleans was a stark concrete building that seemed designed to intimidate. Sarah parked in the visitor lot and gathered the evidence she'd accumulated. Claire Thibodeau's list, recordings of her conversations with Pastor Moreau and Dr. Rousseau, demographic data showing the disappearances, and detailed notes from her interview with Rebecca Landry. Agent Lisa Morrison met her in the lobby, a woman in her 40s with graying hair and tired eyes that suggested she'd seen too much human cruelty. She was accompanied by Agent James Washington, a tall black man who moved with the careful precision of someone accustomed to dangerous situations. Miss Chun, thank you for coming in so quickly, Agent Morrison said as they walked toward the elevators. I need to be very direct with you. Your investigation has put you in serious danger, but it's also given us the break we've been hoping. 4. They entered a secure conference room where a third agent was setting up recording equipment. Agent Morrison introduced him as Agent David Kim from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. Miss Chun, Agent Morrison began, before we proceed, I need to know everything you've discovered and everyone you've contacted during your investigation. Sarah spent the next hour detailing her findings, from the initial demographic patterns through her conversations with Rebecca and the discovery of Claire's list. The agents listened without interruption, occasionally taking notes. Miss Chun, Agent Kim said when she finished, your investigation has been remarkably thorough, but you've also made contact with one of the most dangerous criminal organizations we've ever encountered. Tell me about the Spiritual Renewal Foundation. Agent Washington opened a thick file folder. The foundation has been operating since 1982, originally founded by a man named Dr. Vincent Rousseau and his associate, Dr. Margaret Sinclair. Both were psychology professors who were dismissed from major universities for conducting unauthorized human experiments. What kind of experiments? Social control studies, Agent Morrison replied. They were particularly interested in how isolated communities could be manipulated through religious and economic pressure. When they lost their academic positions, they decided to continue their research through privately funded operations. Agent Kim pulled out a map showing locations throughout the American South. We've identified at least 12 communities that follow the Redemption Creek model. Isolated religious settlements where the leadership exercises total control over residents' lives, funded by the Spiritual Renewal Foundation. How many people are we talking about? Our conservative estimate is over 3,000 people have disappeared from these communities over the past 40 years, Agent Washington said. Most are presumed dead, but we believe several hundred may still be held in various facilities. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the scope of the crimes. Why hasn't this been exposed before? Because the foundation is extremely sophisticated in their operations, Agent Morrison explained. They target people with limited outside connections, poor families, elderly individuals, people with criminal backgrounds who won't be missed. They also corrupt local law enforcement through bribes and intimidation. And they've been careful to spread their operations across multiple jurisdictions, Agent Kim added. A few disappearances here and there don't trigger federal attention. It's only when someone like you starts connecting the patterns that the full scope becomes visible. Agent Morrison leaned forward. Miss Chun, Dr. Russo's call to you yesterday was a mistake on his part. It gave us confirmation of his direct involvement and provided evidence of ongoing kidnapping and murder conspiracies. What about the Tran family? Dr. Russo threatened to kill them if I continued my investigation. That's why we need to move quickly, Agent Washington said. We've been planning a coordinated raid on Redemption Creek and 3 other Foundation communities. But your investigation has forced us to accelerate our timeline. Agent Kim opened another file. Miss Chen, we need your help with something specific. Based on your conversation with Rebecca Landry, you have the most detailed information we've seen about the underground detention facility at Redemption Creek. Rebecca, said Claire Thibodeau, described holding cells beneath the church sanctuary. We need you to work with our technical team to create detailed maps of what Claire might have seen. This information will be crucial for our tactical team's assault on the facility. Sarah spent the next 2 hours working with FBI architects and tactical specialists, reconstructing Claire's descriptions of the underground layout. Based on the notebook's details, they estimated the facility could hold up to 30 people in individual cells, with additional spaces for what Claire had described as processing areas. Miss Chun, Agent Morrison said as they reviewed the preliminary plans. There's something else we need to discuss. Your safety. What do you mean? Dr. Russo and his organization know you've been investigating them. They have significant resources and a history of eliminating threats. We're going to need to place you in protective custody until this operation is complete. For how long? Potentially weeks or months. The Spiritual Renewal Foundation has cells throughout the country, and they won't hesitate to retaliate against anyone who threatens their operations. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. Agent Morrison nodded, indicating she could check it. The message was from an unknown number. Miss Chun, you have 12 hours to contact Dr. Russo and accept his offer. After that, the Tran family will begin their transition to the research phase. Choose wisely. Agent Washington studied the message. They're escalating the timeline. We need to move tonight. Can you be ready that quickly? Sarah asked. We've been planning this operation for months, Agent Morrison replied. Your evidence just gave us the final pieces we needed for search warrants and tactical authorization. Agent Kim was studying satellite images of Redemption Creek on his laptop. Miss Chun, based on your visit yesterday, can you confirm the number of armed personnel you observed? I saw at least 2 men who seemed to be acting as security. They positioned themselves to block the store exit when I tried to leave. Were they carrying visible weapons? Not that I could see, but their body language suggested they were prepared for violence. Agent Washington made notes. We're planning for a much larger security force. These communities typically have 20 to 30 armed guards, often with military or law enforcement backgrounds. What about the people being held captive? How do you ensure their safety during a raid? That's our primary concern, Agent Morrison said. Based on Claire's descriptions and similar facilities we've encountered, the detention areas are likely secured with electronic locks that can be remotely controlled. Our first priority will be securing those areas and evacuating any prisoners. Agent Kim closed his laptop. Miss Chin, there's one more thing. We'd like you to be present during the operation. Sarah was surprised. Why would you want a civilian in a tactical situation? Because you're the only person who's been inside Redemption Creek recently and talked directly with Pastor Moreau. Your insights could be crucial for understanding the facility's layout and identifying key personnel. Isn't that dangerous? Extremely, Agent Morrison said bluntly. But the alternative is allowing the Spiritual Renewal Foundation to continue their operations while destroying evidence and eliminating witnesses. Miss Chun, your investigation has given us a narrow window of opportunity to save lives and bring these criminals to justice. Sarah thought about the Tran family, parents and teenagers who had simply trusted their religious community and were now facing torture and death. She thought about Claire Thibodeau, who had died trying to expose the truth 20 years ago. She thought about the 243 people who had vanished from Redemption Creek and the thousands more who had disappeared from similar communities across the South. What exactly would you need me to do? Stay with our tactical team's command vehicle and provide real-time information about the facility's layout, key personnel, and anything else that might help us locate and rescue the captives, Agent Washington explained. When would this happen? Agent Morrison checked her watch. We'll begin moving assets into position at 2 a.m. The raid will commence at dawn, approximately 6 a.m. That's less than 8 hours from now. Miss Chun, people's lives hang in the balance. Every hour we delay gives the Foundation more time to eliminate evidence and transfer or kill their captives. Sarah looked around the conference room at the 3 agents who had dedicated their careers to fighting crimes like this. She thought about Marcus back in Baton Rouge, probably worried sick about her safety. She thought about Rebecca Landry, living in fear for 20 years because she'd been too frightened to speak out. At 4:30 a.m., Sarah sat in the FBI's mobile command vehicle, parked 3 miles from Redemption Creek. Through the bank of monitors surrounding her, she could see infrared images from surveillance drones, tactical team positions, and real-time satellite feeds of the target area. Agent Morrison sat beside her, coordinating communications between multiple federal agencies. The operation had grown beyond what Sarah had imagined. FBI tactical teams, ATF agents, U.S. Marshals, and even representatives from the Department of Homeland Security. Miss Chun, Agent Kim's voice came through the radio from his position. With the primary assault team, we're seeing movement around the church building. Can you confirm the normal morning routines you observed during your visit? Sarah studied the thermal images on the monitor. When I was there, the town was very quiet until around 10 a.m. This level of activity at 4:30 in the morning isn't normal. Copy that. They may have been alerted to our presence. Agent Morrison frowned. How is that possible? We've maintained communications security and surveillance discipline. Her question was answered moments later when Agent Washington's voice crackled over the radio from his position monitoring electronic communications. Command, we're intercepting encrypted transmissions between Redemption Creek and at least 3 other locations. They definitely know we're coming. Can you determine if they're evacuating prisoners or destroying evidence? Both, it sounds like. We're picking up references to cleaning protocols and asset transfer. Sarah felt sick. They're going to kill the people in those underground cells. Agent Morrison grabbed her radio. All units, we're moving to immediate assault. Alpha Team, proceed to primary breach. Bravo Team, secure the perimeter. Charlie Team, find and secure those underground facilities. Through the monitor, Sarah watched as black-clad figures moved swiftly through the pre-dawn darkness toward Redemption Creek. The thermal imaging showed their approach as ghostly white shapes converging on the town from multiple directions. Alpha Team in position at the church entrance, came the report. Bravo Team has eyes on the main residential buildings, counting approximately 40 subjects, including children. Charlie Team has located what appears to be an underground entrance on the north side of the church building. Agent Morrison turned to Sarah. Does that match what Rebecca described from Claire's observations? Sarah studied the tactical team's position on the monitor. Yes, that's consistent with the layout in Claire's notes. Alpha Team, you have green light for breach. The next few minutes were chaos. Sarah watched multiple camera feeds as FBI agents stormed the church building, searching for Pastor Moreau and the entrance to the underground facility. Simultaneously, other teams were securing residential buildings and gathering the community's residents in the town center. Command, Alpha Team has secured the church sanctuary. We've found concealed stairs behind the altar leading to a lower level. Charlie Team is encountering locked steel doors. We need the breaching charges. Agent Morrison spoke into her radio. Charlie Team, be advised that those doors likely lead to detention cells with potential hostages inside. Use minimum necessary force. Sarah's heart pounded as she listened to the tactical communications. 20 years after Claire Thibodeau had discovered the underground prison, federal agents were finally about to expose what had been hidden beneath Redemption Creek Baptist Fellowship. Command, Charlie Team has breached the first door. We're in a corridor with multiple cells. Requesting medical support immediately. What's the status of potential hostages? There was a long pause before the response came. Command, we have survivors. Multiple individuals in various states of Jesus Christ. What have they done to these people? Agent Kim's voice was strained when he came back on the radio. Command, we have located what appears to be the Tran family. They're alive, but in poor condition. We need immediate medical evacuation. Sarah felt tears of relief streaming down her face. They're alive. Miss Chun, Agent Morrison said, your investigation saved their lives. Without your timeline pressure, we might have been too late. Alpha Team has located Pastor Moreau. He's barricaded himself in an office with several associates. He's claiming diplomatic immunity and demanding to speak with someone from the State Department. Diplomatic immunity? Sarah asked. Agent Morrison's expression was grim. The Spiritual Renewal Foundation has been claiming to operate under various international religious protection treaties. It's nonsense, but it shows how sophisticated their legal strategies are. Charlie Team, what's the total count on survivors in the underground facility? Command, we have 18 individuals in the detention area, ages ranging from approximately 12 to 70. All appear to have been held for various lengths of time, some possibly for years. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the scope of human suffering they were uncovering. What about evidence of the people who didn't survive? Her question was answered when another tactical team reported from a different part of the underground complex. Command, we've located what appears to be a crematorium and laboratory facilities. Extensive documentation of experimental procedures. We're going to need a full forensics team down here. Laboratory facilities. Agent Washington's voice joined the communication from his monitoring position. Miss Chun, remember that Dr. Rousseau described this as social research. It appears they've been conducting actual medical and psychological experiments on their captives. The implications were horrifying. Sarah thought about Claire's list of 47 people who had disappeared between 1998 and 2004, and the 243 total disappearances she had documented. How many had suffered in those underground laboratories before being murdered? Command, we have a problem. Pastor Moreau is claiming that many of the survivors voluntarily participated in the program and that their detention was part of religious, spiritual retreat practices. Agent Morrison grabbed her radio. Negative. Any detention without voluntary consent is kidnapping, regardless of claimed religious justification. Continue processing all subjects as potential victims. Miss Chun, Agent Kim's voice came through the radio. We found Claire Thibodeau's original documentation hidden in Pastor Moreau's office. Her research was far more extensive than what you recovered from the cemetery. What did she find? Evidence of coordination with at least 12 other communities, financial records showing millions in federal grant money being diverted for these operations, and correspondence with researchers at major universities who were apparently receiving data from the experiments. Sarah felt dizzy. This goes beyond the Spiritual Renewal Foundation. Agent Morrison was studying incoming data on her tablet. Miss Chun, it appears your investigation has uncovered a conspiracy involving academic institutions, federal contractors, and religious organizations across multiple states. Command, this is Bravo Team. We've secured all residential areas, but we have a significant problem. We're finding evidence that many families have been separated, with children placed in different facilities. Some of the children here claim their parents were sent away for purification months or years ago. The scope of family destruction was staggering. Sarah realized that the Spiritual Renewal Foundation hadn't just been experimenting on individuals. They had been systematically destroying family units to study the effects of separation and isolation. Charlie Team, have you located any documentation about where transferred subjects might have been taken? Command, we have shipping manifests and transportation logs. It appears subjects have been moved between at least 6 different facilities. We're uploading all documentation for analysis. Agent Morrison turned to Sarah. Miss Chun, your investigation was just the beginning. What we're uncovering here is going to require a multi-state federal task force and probably years of investigation. What about the people who are still missing? The other facilities? We have coordinated raids happening simultaneously at 3 other locations. But based on what we're finding here, there may be dozens of facilities we haven't identified yet. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. Given the ongoing tactical operation, she was surprised any messages were getting through. The message was from Dr. Rousseau. Miss Chun, you've won a battle, but the war is far from over. Our research will continue, and your interference has only delayed the inevitable advancement of human social science. Agent Morrison read the message over Sarah's shoulder. Miss Chun, Dr. Rousseau is still communicating with you. That means he's not in custody at any of our target locations. Where could he be? Anywhere. The Spiritual Renewal Foundation has resources we're still discovering. Miss Chun, your role in this investigation isn't over. We're going to need your help identifying other communities that might be operating similar programs. As the sun rose over Redemption Creek, Sarah watched emergency vehicles arriving to transport the survivors to hospitals in Baton Rouge and New Orleans. Medical personnel were reporting various physical and psychological conditions consistent with long-term imprisonment and experimentation. Command, final count from the underground facility. 18 survivors recovered, extensive forensic evidence of at least 30 additional victims, and documentation suggesting this single location processed over 200 subjects during the past 20 years. Agent Kim's voice carried the weight of what they discovered. Miss Chun, Claire Thibodeau's death count estimate was accurate. We're looking at mass murder on an unprecedented scale. What happens now? Agent Morrison was coordinating with multiple federal agencies through her radio and tablet. Now we process the largest human trafficking and murder investigation in U.S. history. Miss Chun, your investigative reporting is going to become evidence in federal court cases that will likely continue for years. As Sarah watched the last of the survivors being loaded into ambulances, she realized that her story about demographic patterns in rural Louisiana had evolved into exposing a decades-long conspiracy of murder, human experimentation, and systematic family destruction. But Dr. Russo's final message suggested that the Spiritual Renewal Foundation's operations extended far beyond what they had uncovered in Redemption Creek. The investigation that had started with 243 missing people from one small town was about to reveal a network of crimes spanning multiple states and potentially involving hundreds of institutions and thousands of victims. 3 weeks after the Redemption Creek raid, Sarah sat in a secure FBI conference room in Washington, D.C., surrounded by evidence that painted a picture of criminal conspiracy beyond anything she had imagined. The walls were covered with organizational charts, photographs, and maps showing the true scope of the Spiritual Renewal Foundation's operations. Agent Morrison had been promoted to lead the federal task force investigating what media outlets were calling the Southern Sanctuary Conspiracy. 18 survivors from Redemption Creek were receiving medical and psychological treatment, while forensic teams had confirmed the deaths of at least 187 people from that facility alone. Miss Chun, Agent Morrison said, pointing to a map showing locations across 12 states. Your investigation started with one community, but we've now identified 43 facilities operating under the Foundation's network. Sarah studied the map with growing horror. Red pins marked confirmed sites where raids had recovered survivors or evidence of murder. Yellow pins showed locations where investigations were ongoing. Blue pins indicated suspected sites that hadn't yet been searched. How many people are we talking about total? Agent Kim, who had become the task force's lead analyst, consulted his computer. Conservative estimates suggest over 8,000 people have disappeared from these communities over 4 decades. We've recovered 312 survivors so far, confirmed 891 deaths, and are still searching for evidence of approximately 7,000 additional victims. The numbers were staggering. Sarah thought about how her simple demographic analysis had uncovered what was essentially a systematic genocide targeting vulnerable religious communities. What about Dr. Russo? Have you located him? That's partly why you're here, Agent Morrison said. Dr. Russo has been communicating with major media outlets, claiming that the Foundation's work represents legitimate social research and that the federal raids are government overreach against religious freedom. Agent Washington, who had been tracking the Foundation's communications, played an audio recording on his laptop. Dr. Russo's cultured voice filled the room. The subjects who participated in our longitudinal studies lived structured, purposeful lives free from the chaos and desperation of modern society. When individuals proved unable to adapt to community harmony, they were humanely transitioned to contribute to research that will benefit all of humanity. Miss Chun and her federal collaborators have destroyed decades of groundbreaking social science. Sarah felt sick listening to Russo describe murder as humane transition and systematic imprisonment as structured living. Where is he broadcasting from? That's the problem, Agent Kim replied. Our technical teams believe he's operating from international waters, possibly from a research vessel in the Gulf of Mexico. The Foundation has significant maritime assets that we're still discovering. Agent Morrison opened a thick file folder. Miss Chun, we've learned that the Spiritual Renewal Foundation received funding from several sources that make this case even more complex. What kind of sources? Defense Department research grants, CIA psychological warfare studies, and private contracts from major pharmaceutical companies. The foundation wasn't just conducting rogue experiments. They were providing data to legitimate government and corporate research programs. Sarah felt the implications washing over her. You're saying that federal agencies were complicit in these murders? We're saying that the foundation was sophisticated enough to embed their criminal operations within legitimate research programs. Agency officials thought they were funding standard social psychology studies, not human experimentation camps. Agent Kim pulled up financial records on his computer. Miss Chun, the foundation received over $200 million in research funding between 1985 and 2024. Most of that money was funneled through universities and think tanks that had no idea what was actually happening in places like Redemption Creek. But someone had to know. You don't accidentally fund systematic murder for 40 years. That's what we're investigating now, Agent Morrison said. We've identified at least 17 federal employees and university administrators who received regular reports from Foundation operations. Some appear to have been unknowing dupes, but others clearly knew they were funding human rights violations. Sarah's phone buzzed with a call from Marcus. Agent Morrison nodded, indicating she could answer. Sarah, thank God. I've been trying to reach you for hours. Have you seen the news? What news? Dr. Russo just released what he's calling the Redemption Creek Papers, 40 years of research data from the Foundation's operations. He's claiming it proves that their community control methods could solve everything from urban crime to international terrorism. Agent Washington was already pulling up news feeds on his computer. Major outlets were reporting that Dr. Russo had released thousands of documents detailing the Foundation's research methodologies, including psychological profiles of subjects, effectiveness studies of various control techniques, and recommendations for implementing similar programs on larger scales. Marcus, what exactly is he releasing? Sarah, it's horrifying. He's publishing detailed case studies of individual families that were destroyed, including before and after psychological evaluations. But he's framing it as groundbreaking research that proves isolated communities can be perfectly controlled through religious manipulation and systematic elimination of dissent. Agent Morrison grabbed the phone. Mr. Williams, this is Agent Morrison with the FBI. We need to coordinate with your newspaper about how to responsibly report on this information without giving Dr. Russo a platform for propaganda. Agent Morrison, I understand your concerns, but the public has a right to know the scope of what happened. Sarah's investigation uncovered the largest mass murder conspiracy in U.S. history. Sarah took the phone back. Marcus, what kind of reaction are you seeing to the document release? That's what's really scary, Sarah. While most people are horrified, there are some academic and policy circles that are treating this as legitimate social research. 3 universities have already announced conferences to study the Foundation's methodologies. Agent Kim looked up from his computer. Miss Chun, Dr. Russo is also claiming that similar programs are operating in other countries, and that the Foundation was part of an international research network studying optimal human social organization. Other countries? We're coordinating with Interpol and intelligence agencies from 12 nations. Preliminary investigations suggest Foundation-affiliated operations may exist in Canada, Mexico, and several European countries. The scope of the conspiracy continued to expand. Sarah realized that her investigation of 243 missing people from one Louisiana town had revealed a global network of systematic human rights violations disguised as social research. Miss Chun, Agent Morrison said, we need your help with something specific. Dr. Russo has challenged media outlets to send investigators to visit what he calls successful Foundation communities where residents will allegedly testify about the benefits of their social programs. You want me to visit more of these places? We want you to be part of a coordinated media response that exposes the reality of these operations without giving Dr. Russo the propaganda platform he's seeking. Agent Washington pulled up a list of locations on his computer. We've identified 5 communities that appear to still be operating Foundation programs, but they've modified their operations since the Redemption Creek raid. They're presenting themselves as model religious communities and inviting media scrutiny. That sounds like a trap. It probably is, Agent Morrison agreed. But it's also an opportunity to document current operations and potentially rescue additional victims. Sarah studied the locations on the map. What kind of protection would I have? Full federal support, surveillance teams, communications monitoring, and rapid response capabilities. Miss Chun, we've learned from Redemption Creek. We won't let you go in unprepared. Agent Kim opened another file. Miss Chun, there's something else you should know. We've been analyzing the survivors' testimonies, and several of them specifically mentioned being told that their families had been killed because of outside interference from journalists. They were using my investigation as a threat. It appears the Foundation leadership used your presence in Redemption Creek to accelerate their timeline for eliminating witnesses. Miss Chun, your investigation saved the Tran family and 17 others, but it may have also triggered the murder of people who were being held at other facilities. The weight of that responsibility was crushing. Sarah realized that every decision she made could determine whether people lived or died. What do you want me to do? Agent Morrison spread out photographs of the 5 remaining communities. We want you to visit these locations as part of a coordinated media response. Other journalists will be visiting different sites simultaneously, so Dr. Russo can't focus his countermeasures on any single location. What am I looking for? Evidence of current human rights violations, documentation of people being held against their will, and proof that these communities are still operating as Foundation experimental sites rather than legitimate religious settlements. Sarah's phone buzzed with another call from Marcus. Agent Morrison, can I take this? Of course. Marcus, what's happening? Sarah, Dr. Russo just released another statement. He's specifically naming you as responsible for destroying decades of peaceful community research and claims that your sensationalist journalism has resulted in the deaths of research subjects who could have contributed to solving global social problems. He's blaming me for the murders. Worse than that, Sarah, he's calling on supporters of legitimate social research to prevent further interference with Foundation operations. Sarah, I think he's putting a target on your back. Agent Morrison took the phone. Mr. Williams, we're already implementing security protocols for Miss Chun. But this confirms our assessment that Dr. Rousseau sees her as a primary threat to his operations. After ending the call, Agent Morrison turned back to Sarah. Miss Chun, I need to be very direct about the risks. Dr. Rousseau has significant resources and a demonstrated willingness to eliminate threats. If you continue this investigation, you'll be in danger for the foreseeable future. What about the people still trapped in those communities? That's exactly why we need your help. You've proven you can identify the signs of Foundation operations that other investigators might miss. Agent Kim pulled up survivor testimonies on his computer. Miss Chun, the people we rescued from Redemption Creek are providing detailed information about how the Foundation's programs have evolved. They're describing increasingly sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques and more careful screening of potential victims. What kind of screening? They target people with limited family connections, individuals with criminal backgrounds who won't be missed, and families in financial distress who are vulnerable to offers of community support. But they've also begun recruiting people specifically because of their professional skills. What do you mean? Agent Washington opened another file. Miss Chun, we've found evidence that the Foundation has been systematically recruiting teachers, nurses, mechanics, and other skilled professionals to support their operations. These people aren't just victims, they're being used as infrastructure to expand the Foundation's capabilities. The implications were staggering. Sarah realized that the Foundation wasn't just conducting experiments on isolated communities. They were building a parallel society with its own skilled workforce. Miss Chun, Agent Morrison said, there's one more thing. We've intercepted communications suggesting that Dr. Rousseau is planning to relocate his primary operations outside U.S. jurisdiction. If we don't act quickly, he may escape accountability and continue his programs internationally. Where is he planning to go? We believe he has agreements with governments in several countries that are interested in his community control methodologies. Miss Chun, if Dr. Rousseau successfully establishes Foundation operations in countries with weaker human rights protections, thousands more people could die. Sarah looked around the conference room at the evidence of 4 decades of systematic murder and human experimentation. She thought about the 18 survivors from Redemption Creek, slowly recovering from years of imprisonment and torture. She thought about the Tran family, rebuilding their lives after nearly being killed for questioning their religious community's authority. Agent Morrison, what exactly do you need me to do? Visit these 5 communities over the next 2 weeks. Document what you observe. Look for signs of current human rights violations. Most importantly, help us identify people who might be at immediate risk so we can plan rescue operations. And after that, Miss Chun, you'll probably need to testify in federal court cases that will continue for years. The Foundation's operations involve thousands of criminals and victims across multiple states. Your investigation started this, but the legal process will take a very long time to complete. Sarah studied the photographs of the 5 communities she would visit. Each looked peaceful and isolated, just like Redemption Creek had appeared when she first arrived there 3 weeks earlier. Agent Morrison, what happens if Dr. Rousseau is right about one thing? What if some people in these communities are genuinely happy with their situations? Miss Chun, happiness obtained through systematic elimination of anyone who might provide alternative perspectives isn't genuine happiness. It's manufactured compliance. Even if some Foundation subjects report satisfaction with their situations, that doesn't justify the murder of hundreds of people who questioned or resisted the program. Agent Kim closed his laptop and gathered his files. Miss Chun, we've learned from analyzing Foundation documents that their ultimate goal wasn't just to control small religious communities. They were developing scalable methodologies for managing large populations through strategic elimination of dissent and systematic control of information. You're talking about social control on a national level. That's exactly what Dr. Rousseau's research was designed to achieve. Miss Chun, your investigation didn't just uncover a series of murders. You exposed a program that was testing techniques for undermining democratic society itself. As Sarah prepared to leave the conference room, Agent Morrison handed her a secure phone and detailed briefing materials for her upcoming visits to the remaining Foundation communities. Miss Chun, the next 2 weeks will determine whether we can shut down the Foundation's domestic operations and prevent Dr. Rousseau from establishing international programs. Your investigation gave us the evidence we needed to begin this process, but we need your continued help to finish it. Sarah realized that her story about demographic patterns in rural Louisiana had evolved into something far beyond journalism. She was now part of a federal law enforcement operation aimed at stopping one of the most sophisticated criminal conspiracies in American history. As she walked out of the FBI building in Washington, D.C., Sarah understood that her investigation was far from over. Dr. Rousseau was still operating somewhere in international waters, planning to rebuild his network of experimental communities. The survivors of Redemption Creek and other Foundation sites were beginning the long process of recovering from years of imprisonment and torture. And somewhere in 5 remaining communities, people were still being held captive by an organization that had spent 40 years perfecting techniques for controlling human behavior through systematic elimination of dissent. The story that had started with 243 missing people from one small Louisiana town had revealed a conspiracy that threatened the foundation of democratic society itself. Sarah's investigation had saved hundreds of lives and exposed decades of systematic murder, but the fight against the Spiritual Renewal Foundation was just beginning. As she drove back to Louisiana to continue her investigation, Sarah carried with her the knowledge that journalism had the power to uncover even the most carefully hidden crimes, and that sometimes the stories that seemed like simple demographic studies could reveal truths that changed everything.